Good evening, students. Your exams are fast approaching, and in order for me to help you prepare for your examinations, I have put together a short video reviewer which you can watch over the academic break. Now, this video reviewer is just part one for your EAPP review sessions, and we will be covering the pointers which will be included in this particular examination. And should you ask about the pointers, these are the following inclusions in the examination scope. First, we will begin with Module 1, which covers the nature and structure of academic texts, summarizing a text. We have outlining, citing sources, and paraphrasing a text. Now, for Module 2, we only have one lesson, which is writing a reaction paper. So, without much ado, let's begin this video reviewer. And we begin with lesson number 1, which is the lesson about the nature and structure of academic texts. Now, you might be asking, what are we going to discuss in this video review? Well, we are going to cover the following. First, we are going to discuss the types of texts and some examples. Second would be the structure of academic texts. And we are going to expound on these concepts later on. So to begin, there are two types of texts. We have academic and non-academic texts. But what are academic texts? These are texts which are written for or under a specific field, and usually these are documents which are published by known specialists under that particular field. It uses formal language, most of the time involving jargons, and citations are a key feature in these types of texts. Now, some examples of academic texts include research papers, scientific journals, and dissertations. Now, on the other hand, what are non-academic texts? Well, non-academic texts are those which are written for the purpose of leisure or entertainment, and they usually use informal or figurative language, and sometimes citations are not even necessary in this type of text. Now, what are some examples? We have comic books, magazines, and newspapers. So, now that we know the definition of academic and non-academic texts, and we know the examples of academic and non-academic texts, we now move on to the structure of academic texts. How do we construct and how do we design this type of output or academic text? Well, these texts have a mnemonic, and you have to think of I, B, and C. Okay, IBC stands for the intro, the body, and the conclusion. These are the three components of an academic text. Well, you might say that these parts are also included in non-academic texts, but in academic texts, these are a must. And there are specific entries and there are specific things that you should place in the following parts for your academic text to be considered as valid. So, the introduction, it contains the overview of the content of the text. And this is also where the thesis statement is located. Now, in some non-academic texts, such as stories and whatnot, the thesis statement might not be found anywhere in the entire document. So, this is the one feature that is specific only to academic texts. Now, for the body of the text, this is where the explanation of the key points is placed. And this is also the part where the examples and most of the citations are found. Not too many citations are found in the introduction, but the bulk of the citations, the borrowed sources, the examples, and the explanations are found in the body. Now, lastly, we also have the conclusion, which contains the generalization of the key points presented in the earlier part of the text. In a way, you could say that this is the recap portion of your essay or your text, and it also serves as the summary of everything that was discussed by the author in the text. So, the encapsulation of all the salient points are found in this particular part. So, to summarize, academic texts are used for a specific field, they are written under a specific field, and they are written by experts of that specific field. They use formal language, and the use of citations is a definite must. Non-academic texts, on the other hand, are for everybody and may not be written by an expert, and they use informal or figurative language, and thus the use of citations might not be required for all types of non-academic texts. The introduction is known as the overview of the text. Okay, the body is where the explanation is located, and the conclusion serves as the generalization or the recap part of what were discussed in the text. Okay, now that wraps up lesson 1. To proceed to lesson 2, we have summarizing a text. Now, under summarizing a text, we are going to discuss the following. First, we are going to dig into the definition of summarizing as a concept. Second, we are going to determine the purpose of summarizing and why it is important in the field of academic texts. And lastly, we are going to go through the process of summarizing. We will do it step by step. Okay, so to begin, what is summarizing as a process? Okay, so as a process, summarizing is the shortening of a text, and this is done by extracting and focusing on the main points or the main arguments made by an author. Some examples of summaries in real life would be: number 1, you can find them in research abstracts. Number 2, some summaries also come in the form of movie trailers, wherein the movie is condensed into a few seconds or maybe more than a minute's worth of scenes, wherein the important scenes of the plot, from introduction down to resolution, are included. Lastly, you also have book synopsis. This one is found at the back of the book and contains the major points in the plot in that particular story as well. So, why do we write a summary? Okay, why is summarizing important in academic texts? Well, summaries are created to present the condensed version of that text or even a film as an overview. So, before reading the actual text, summaries are written in order for the readers to get an idea as to what the text, the research, the document, the journal, or even a dissertation is all about. So how do we create a summary? Well, as mentioned, we are going to do it step by step. And it begins with reading the material multiple times. Why do we need to do so? We need to do so because the only way for us to get a deep understanding of what the text is all about is when we read the material multiple times. We go over certain words and certain concepts and try to get a feel of whether this concept or this idea or this argument is important or not. Okay, so because we retain only the important ideas, we make sure that they are definitely vital and that they are central. Okay, its role is central in the text. Step number 2, we then extract the thesis statement from the original text or from the source text. What is the thesis statement? Well, the thesis statement, in simplest terms, this is what the entire text is all about. This is the gist, the meat of the actual text. You can find the thesis statement or most of the time in the introduction portion of an academic text or in the first paragraph. And this is very important because it will set the tone of your summary. this is going to be the cornerstone of the summary. Everything is built upon the thesis statement. So step number 3, once you have your thesis statement, you now get the main ideas or arguments in support of that thesis statement, or relevant to the thesis statement. So the main ideas are then extracted to provide justification for the thesis statement. And this is followed by the inclusion of the short explanation of the points. So you don't just mention the main ideas. Instead, you also insert a little bit of explanation as to why these main ideas or arguments were made by the author. And then we proceed to the determination of the author's conclusion to the text. So we determine how the author concluded the text. Now, we're not going to copy the conclusion. Instead, we're just going to get an idea of what the conclusion is. We're going to reword the whole thing, and then we translate it into our own words, into our own version. And last but definitely not the least, to ensure that our summary is sound and correct, we then check for accuracy. Were we able to highlight the main points? And in a way, does our summary resemble the entire text? And does it fulfill its function of presenting an overview or a condensed version of that source text? Okay, so again, those are the steps that you need to take in creating a summary. So in keeping with the theme of this lesson, we are going to summarize. And to summarize the whole thing, summaries are shortened versions of the text. Okay, that's the first thing. And summaries are shortened because we only extract the main points. Okay, they only contain the main points. Next, summaries are created to give readers an overview of the actual text. To spark interest and to get the attention of the readers, it is good to provide them with a summary. Okay, that ends lesson number 2, and we now proceed to lesson number 3. Now, before we begin the discussion of lesson number 3, I must give you a heads up. The discussion is going to center around outlining only. I did not include citing sources in this video because I decided to put it in, or I decided to make a separate review video for citing sources, as there are multiple entries and it will take much time in discussing the format of the in-text and reference citations. So for this video, we will only have outlining as the discussion proper. Okay, so in this lesson, as I said, we are only going to focus on outlining, and we begin with defining the process of outlining, and then we move on to the types of outlines, and we will define them as well. Lastly, we are also going to discuss the purpose of outlines. Okay? Why are outlines created in the first place? So let's start. What are outlines, and what is outlining as a process? Well, outlines are frameworks. Okay, these are the foundations of an essay, and outlining is a process of mapping out the structure of an essay or a text. Now, you could say that outlining is like a design blueprint, okay, from an architecture point of view. Before the actual building is constructed, they begin with a blueprint, okay? And this blueprint is likened to an outline. Now, this outline is also like the skeleton of the text, okay? For your essay or your academic text to stand, it must be built on a solid foundation, and the skeleton must be present. So there are two types of outlines that we can choose from. First is the topic outline, and the second one is the sentence outline. Now, to define both of them, topic outline is one that uses single words or short phrases in order to map out the structure of your essay. Now, this is done when you have initial thoughts but cannot put them into sentences yet. Okay, so you begin with thoughts, maybe bits and pieces of concepts that you wish to add to your essay. This is the primary step in coming up with an academic text. You begin with a topic outline. Now, once you feel that you are content and satisfied with the concepts or the bits and pieces of concepts that you have included in your topic outline, you may now proceed to step number 2, which is the formulation of a sentence outline. And a sentence outline is defined as an expanded topic outline. Okay. And we say that it is expanded because from the words and phrases that you used in the topic outline, we now expand them into full sentences. So again, these are not two different concepts. The topic outline and the sentence outline are somehow interrelated and interconnected. So why do we create outlines in the first place? What is its significance? Well, outlines are created because we want to give the writers an idea of the structure and flow of the text before it is actually written. And there's a saying that goes, if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. Now, failure to plan in terms of the structure of your text might eventually lead to catastrophic results. It will be very, very difficult for a writer to edit the text or an essay when he or she decides to proceed to the writing of full paragraphs. Okay, it will be very difficult to reword and restructure the whole thing. However, when you begin with an outline, it is easier because the only things that you have to reshuffle and to restructure are maybe single words or short phrases. So that way, you get a preliminary idea of how your essay is going to sound like and how it is going to flow before the essay or the actual essay is written. So, aside from giving the writers an idea of the structure and flow of the text, it is also created for the purpose of convenience in terms of editing. As I said, it is very difficult to edit your essay once the paragraphs are set in place. But when you begin your editing phase with the outlines that you have created, then in my opinion, I believe that that is a more convenient way of restructuring, reframing your essays because it will not take too much of your time. So to summarize the lesson, first, outlines map out text structure, and topic outlines specifically use words or short phrases. Now, on the other hand, sentence outlines use complete sentences and are called, or they are commonly known as, the expanded topic outlines. The function of outlines is that it helps, or outlines help a writer plan out the content of the text before it is actually written. Okay, that wraps up lesson number 3. Now we proceed to lesson number 4, which is paraphrasing a text. Okay, again, in this lesson, we are going to go through the definition of paraphrasing. Next, we will discuss the purpose of paraphrasing. And last but definitely not the least, we are going to discuss the process of paraphrasing. And this will be done step by step as well. So let's begin. What is paraphrasing as a process? Well, paraphrasing is the process of expressing a text using your own words. This is also known as your version of the text. As an example, I usually give or I usually make Filipino singers as an example. Over time, Filipino artists, singers have given their own rendition of popular foreign songs, and in a way, this could be understood as a form of paraphrasing. Maybe not in the lexical level, not in the word level, but definitely when an artist sings the song in his or her own style, then that can be likened to a paraphrase, wherein a writer takes a different text and then puts his or her own flavor to it, expresses the thought, the same thought, but in a different way. So, to debunk any false assumptions about paraphrasing, let me just establish that paraphrasing is not merely the substitution of words. It is not enough that you are going to search for synonyms of certain words and then claim that it is already a valid paraphrase. The process of paraphrasing is much more complex than that, as it involves both the rewording and the restructuring of the entire text. You don't just change a few parts, you don't just change a few words. Instead, you totally restructure and reword the whole thing. In a way, you could say that this is a total renovation of the original text. Not because it is faulty, but because you want to express the same thought, but in your own way. So why do we paraphrase? Okay, why is paraphrasing significant? Well, paraphrasing is done for two main reasons. Okay, academically. First is that we want to respect intellectual property, and the second reason is for the purpose of simplification. I will be discussing each function or each reason. Now, the first one is to respect intellectual property, and that is a very big thing, especially in the field of, or in the aspect of the academe, because we are asked to paraphrase so that we avoid committing plagiarism. And we know that many many people have fallen victim to the crime that is plagiarism, and we do not want it to proliferate anymore. Okay, so paraphrasing is definitely a skill that one academic writer or a student such as yourself will need to develop while in school, because aside from saving us from the perils of plagiarism, it will also enhance our writing ability. Now, second, we also paraphrase to simplify and to contextualize. Now, some of the times, when we encounter academic texts, the language used by the original authors, especially when dealing with scientific journals or dissertations, the language that they use is very high. And in some cases, when we write our student research paper, for example, in senior high school, these terms might not be something that is familiar to your prospective readers, okay, or your prospective readers. So what you do is you paraphrase not only to avoid committing plagiarism, but also to simplify these terms and to contextualize um, the words, the terminologies. So terminologies used by doctors, terminologies used by lawyers might not be very applicable to students who are younger, and to for example, junior high school students. So um, in order for the results of their researches, their findings to be more accessible to the younger demographic or to the general public, then we are going to have to simplify and contextualize these research findings and these terminologies. So those are the two functions of, or the two reasons why we paraphrase a text. So what are the steps in paraphrasing? Why do we have to do it, and how do we do it? Okay, so step number one is rewording. By rewording, I mean to overhaul and to change the words used in the original text. Um, we have to keep in mind that even when we use different words, our first consideration must always be the message of the original text, and we must retain that message. There must be um, a, there must be close attention paid to what the author originally meant, because we are going to have to bank on that in the process of rewording our paraphrased version. So rewording does not only involve synonyms, but to be able to understand what the original author meant in the original statement and to translate that into simpler terms but with the same meaning. So after you reword the whole thing, Okay, after you are able to translate the message of the original author into your own terms, then this is now the time to restructure the whole thing. Sometimes when all you do is reword the original text, it might not make full sense. The coherence might be off, or the flow of the message might not be very fluid. So what you do is to restructure the whole text. You get to rearrange the thoughts, the points, the arguments of the original author, and to put your own spin to it. Okay, present the same points, present the same arguments, but in a different way. Okay, or observing a different structure, and this way we are not simply paraphrasing on a word level, but we are paraphrasing on a structure level, which is a more effective way to paraphrase the text, as it will not sound like a translated version, or a version that only focuses on synonyms. Okay, so restructuring the text will definitely improve to the quality of the paraphrased version. Okay, to summarize the points presented, number one, paraphrasing is the process of expressing a text in your own words. Second, we discussed that paraphrasing is done to respect intellectual property, but also it is also done to simplify and to contextualize the original text. Next, paraphrasing is also not just the substitution of words, but also the restructuring of the statements. Again, following the steps, step one, which is rewording the text, and step two, which is restructuring the source text. Okay, we are done with module 1. Now it is time to proceed to the only lesson in module 2, which is the writing of a reaction paper. Now, in this lesson, we are going to talk about the following things. First would be your reaction paper definition, or how people understand a reaction paper and how they perceive reaction papers. Second, we are also going to talk about the purpose of a reaction paper. And last but definitely not the least, we will also discuss on the side some common literary approaches used in writing critiques. So, to begin, what is a reaction paper? Now, many people understand that a reaction paper, first and foremost, is also sometimes called a critique, and that generally a reaction paper is a document that evaluates or criticizes. Now, what does it evaluate or criticize? A reaction paper may evaluate another research paper, okay, or an academic text. It may evaluate an ordinance, a law, a policy, or in the field of literature, it may also criticize literary texts, movies, even food. Okay, so in criticizing and evaluating these things, usually the output that we are able to produce is a reaction paper. So an evaluation, okay, again, as I said, may be of another academic text, a law, a policy, a movie, or even food items, as is presented in one famous movie called Ratatouille. Okay, in the last part of that movie, Ego writes food criticism, okay, about Gusto's restaurant, and I think that is one very good example of a critique, okay, or a reaction paper in general. So reaction papers are written to provide a person's impression, or even a group of people's impressions, about the subject being evaluated, regardless of what subject it is, be it a law, a research paper, or etc. etc. In literature, these reaction papers are known as critiques and are found usually in the field of literary criticism. And in literary criticism, we do not usually use the term reaction paper. Instead, the word critique is used. Now, banking on that, there are 4 common literary approaches used in writing a critique. Okay, there are more approaches actually, but these are the four most common approaches, especially the ones used um, in secondary education, or in senior high school. One, we have formalism. Two, we have feminism. Three is reader's response, and four is Marxism. Now, to discuss each of them, formalism is a type of approach wherein the evaluation of a literary text is focused on the text itself and its elements. So we do not consider extraneous factors. Okay, we only focus on what is found inside the text. For feminism, okay, the evaluation is focused on the portrayal of the different sexes. But as I understand, in recent years, we have shifted from naming it as feminism down to gender studies, okay, in the field of literary criticism. So we don't just focus on women, but instead we look at all the sexes, all the genders, as part of this literary approach. Next, we have reader's response, which is focused on the reader's impression of a text, and also putting into consideration some extraneous factors such as the experiences of the characters in the story in relation to the experiences of the readers. Okay, so these things are being considered when writing a critique based on the reader's response approach. Now, last but definitely not the least, Marxism is an evaluation based on the portrayal of the different social classes, the rich and the poor, and certain stereotypes about these social classes as well. This literary approach is taken from the name of Karl Marx, who I guess is a very prominent figure, especially in the field of economics and in philosophy. Okay, so those are the four literary approaches commonly used in literary criticism. And to summarize the points discussed in this particular lesson, we begin with reaction papers are also named as critiques, and that these documents, these texts, are used to evaluate or criticize other texts or works of art. Now, the four common literary approaches are formalism, feminism, reader's response, and Marxism. Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, I believe that ends our video reviewer for part 1 of EAPP. Watch out for part 2, which will cover citation and referencing, and we will be using the 7th edition of the American Psychological Association, or the APA format. So that concludes our video review. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day ahead.